whole windbreak comes down, we want our lake view back!
That's what the HOA president shouted at a 6-man tree crew on the line of my Wisconsin farm, while I was 40 miles away at a feed mill in Manawa. By the time my son called me, 40 of my grandfather's 1947 black cherry and white oak trees were on the ground. By the time I got home, all 60 were down, the stumps fresh, the sawdust still warm. The HOA president was on her porch with a glass of wine, smiling. What that woman did not know was that her crew had cleared a windbreak registered with the USDA. Some white oaks were protected under Wisconsin's Heritage Tree Act, and the aesthetic easement she claimed she had was a forged document her husband had recorded in 2010. I did not yell. I sat on my porch with my wife and son that night and started designing the 100-foot grain silo I was about to build on the property line. Tell me, what would you have done? The windbreak was the first thing my grandfather planted on this farm. Lars Halverson came back from the Pacific in the spring of 1946 with a steel plate in his skull, a half pension from the Navy, and a marriage license he had signed by candlelight in a Minneapolis courthouse before he shipped out. He took out a $6,000 GI Bill loan, bought 120 acres of cut-over land in Wapaka County, Wisconsin, and on the first day of April in 1947, he planted 60 seedlings along the western property line: black cherry, white oak, and eastern hemlock. He spaced them 8 feet apart. He drove the stakes with a hand maul. The windbreak was his first crop. He built the house second. My name is Tobias Halverson. I'm 57 years old, a fourth-generation dairy and grain farmer, and the man who has been working this land in some capacity since I could walk behind my father in a clover row. Everybody calls me Toby. My wife Greta is 55, an agricultural extension agent for the University of Wisconsin Extension Office in Wapaka, and she has been married to me for 31 years. Our son Wyatt, 24, took over the dairy operation last year. Our daughter Marigold, 27, is a veterinary surgeon down at the UW Small Animal Teaching Hospital in Madison. My father Henrik is 81. He still lives in the original farmhouse, 50 yards north of our place, in the same kitchen where Lars made breakfast for my grandmother every morning for 43 years. Henrik can no longer milk a cow. He can still, on a good day, tell you the exact number of growing degree days we accumulated in the third week of June 1973. My twin brother Rune died at 19, in a Massey Ferguson tractor rollover on this farm, in the alfalfa field directly south of the windbreak. He was driving the same Massey Lars had bought, used in 1962. The wheel slipped into a gopher hole. The tractor went over. I was in the next field harrowing. I drove to him in 2.5 minutes. It was not fast enough. It has been 38 years. I think about Rune every time I cross that field. Some days it is bearable, some days it isn't. The windbreak was Rune's favorite place on the farm. He used to sit under the third white oak from the north end and read paperbacks all summer. He liked Larry McMurtry novels and bad science fiction in equal measure. The tree was his. In 2008, a developer named Halsey Pendergrast bought 80 acres of low pasture on the lake-facing side of our western property line. He built a premium subdivision he called Lakeshore Hills Estates, 78 lots, a clubhouse with stamped concrete tile, the kind of development that creates an HOA before it creates a single house, and then, a few years later, forgets which side of the property line that HOA actually owns. The HOA's first president, a polite retired insurance broker named Ronald Coombs, introduced himself to my father in 2009 over coffee and never caused any trouble. The second president, elected in 2013, was a woman named Britlin Yarwood Chesterfield. Britlin was 54 years old, heavy-set under coral linen and cream cashmere, blonde the way money is blonde, and the wife of a man named Stuart Yarwood Chesterfield, who served as district director for our state senator. Britlin had decided, almost immediately on taking office, that the most important problem facing Lakeshore Hills Estates was the row of 75-year-old trees on its eastern boundary that was blocking the lake view from 21 of the development's premium lots. For 11 years, I watched her work on that problem. She started small. In 2014, she sent a letter to my father suggesting selective limb pruning of the windbreak's lake-facing side to open up the regional viewshed. My father, who was then 75 years old and still mentally sharp, wrote back a one-line reply. Mrs. Yarwood Chesterfield, the trees were planted by my father in 1947, and they are not for sale, not for pruning, and not for discussion. Thank you for your interest. Henrik Halverson. In 2017, she organized a neighborhood beautification petition that argued the windbreak created a regional aesthetic deficit. 14 Lakeshore Hills households signed it. She submitted it to the Wapaka County Zoning Board, which dismissed it on the grounds that working agricultural windbreaks fall outside HOA jurisdiction. In 2019, she filed a complaint with the Department of Natural Resources, alleging the windbreak was harboring invasive species. A DNR forester walked the line and filed a report rating the windbreak healthy and well-managed. In 2021, she tried offering to buy the windbreak strip outright at 3 times its agricultural land value. My father, by then in his late 70s, returned her letter unopened. In September of this year, on a Monday morning while I was at the Manawa feed mill, she finally solved it. The first call came at 3:18 in the afternoon. It was Wyatt. His voice was the level 24-year-olds get when they are working very hard not to sound like they are panicking. Dad, the HOA's got a crew on the line. They're cutting the windbreak. I was in the parking lot of the Manawa feed mill, loading the last bag of distiller's grains into the bed of my truck. I stopped with the bag in my hands. How many? 6 guys, 2 skidders, a flatbed. How many trees? Dad, they've taken down at least 40. I'm watching from the kitchen window. Wyatt, get on the phone. Call the sheriff. Call Mom. Call your grandfather. Tell them to stay inside until I get there. Dad, Grandpa's already on the back porch. I closed my eyes. My 81-year-old father, Lars Halverson's only living son, was standing on the back porch of the original farmhouse, watching strangers cut down his father's 1947 windbreak. Get him inside, Wyatt, now. I drove the 40 miles in 31 minutes. By the time I pulled into the gravel drive, the crew had taken down all 60 trees, 60 stumps, 60 sets of skidder tracks, 60 piles of slash, 3 full flatbeds of saw logs already loaded for hauling. The crew was wrapping the last load with chain. The foreman was an older man I recognized from 20 years of timber sales at the auction barn in New London. His name was Wendell Schaefer. He had cut maybe 30,000 cords for me, my father, and my grandfather between 1991 and 2018. He was a careful man. He was an honest man. He looked, when I got out of the truck, like a careful and honest man who had just realized he had been used. Toby. Wendell. Toby, I want you to know, I've already called my insurance. I've already saved every email. I just got the work order this morning. The HOA paid the deposit on Friday. Stuart Yarwood Chesterfield signed the work order. They told me the line ran 28 feet east of where we cut. They produced a survey. I asked for documentation. They produced a recorded easement from 2010. By the time I figured out the survey was wrong, we had 40 trees on the ground. How long have you been on this property? 6.5 hours. Did you stop when you figured it out? I stopped at tree 41. I called the HOA office. I told them I needed to confirm the line with the landowner before I went further. Britlin Yarwood Chesterfield drove down here personally. She told me the landowner had been notified. She told me to keep cutting. You believed her. Toby, I did. I should not have. I am very sorry. I have known Wendell Schaefer since I was 8 years old. He cried at my mother's funeral in 2003. He helped me pull a calf in a January blizzard in 1998. He is the kind of man who would not, on his own, take down a single tree he had not been hired to take down. He had been lied to. Wendell, stop loading, stop hauling. Nothing leaves this property until the sheriff has documented the scene. Are you willing to give a sworn statement? Toby, I will give a statement to anyone who asks. Thank you. I looked across the property line. Britlin Yarwood Chesterfield was on her back porch 400 feet up the slope, in a coral linen wrap, holding a glass of white wine and a phone. She was watching us. She was smiling. She lifted the glass in something that was either a toast or a salute. I did not return it. I walked back to the truck. I sat in the cab for 1 full minute with my hands on the steering wheel. The smell of fresh cut oak was so strong it hung in my nostrils for 2 days after. Then I went inside. Greta was at the kitchen table with my father. My father was sitting very still, looking at the empty space where his father's windbreak had stood for 77 years. He had a cup of coffee in front of him. He had not touched it. Pennsylvania. He looked up at me. His eyes were the gray of late November water in Lake Winnebago. Toby. I'm sorry. He shook his head once, very slowly. He did not speak. He picked up the coffee cup. He sipped. He set it down. Then he said, in a voice I had heard him use exactly twice in my life, the same voice he had used in 1986 when we put Rune in the ground. Son, don't do anything you can't undo, and don't let them think they've won. Not for one day, not for 1 hour. Yes, Pa. He nodded. He stood up. He walked, slowly, back across the yard to his own house. I sat at the table with Greta. She put her hand on top of mine. Toby, what are we going to do? I looked out the window at the empty slope where the windbreak had stood. I looked at the lake. I looked at the row of premium Lakeshore Hills lots, 21 of them, with brand new clear lake views. Greta, have you ever wanted to live next to a 100-foot grain silo? She tilted her head. Toby, are you serious? I am extremely serious. She thought about it for 10 seconds. Then she said, Toby Halverson, you build that silo. Sheriff Buford Petrasic arrived at 6:45 that evening with 2 deputies, a crime scene technician, and a digital camera. He had known my father since high school. Toby. Buford. Walk me through it. I walked him through it. Wendell, who had not left the property, walked through his end. The crime scene tech photographed every stump. She measured 11 of the larger ones. 3 of the white oaks were over 40 inches at the cut, and she logged the growth ring counts. The largest oak, the one Rune used to read under, was 81 rings. Buford watched her work in silence. Then he turned to me. Toby, I have to ask you a question. Did anyone, at any point before this morning, give you written notice that this cutting was going to happen? No. Did anyone ask for or attempt to obtain your permission for this cutting? No. Did you file an aesthetic easement of any kind in 2010 in favor of Lakeshore Hills Estates HOA? No, and neither did my father. We have never granted any easement to that HOA. Buford looked across the slope at the empty row of stumps. Then he looked at the back porch of Britland Yarwood Chesterfield, where she was no longer standing because she had gone inside about 20 minutes earlier. Toby, I'm going to walk over there now and have a conversation with Mrs. Yarwood Chesterfield. With your permission, I'd also like to have one of my deputies stay here overnight on the property to ensure nothing else is touched. Buford, please. And Toby, this is criminal trespass. This is criminal destruction of property. This may be felony timber theft. If the recorded easement Wendell mentioned is a fraudulent recording, this is also felony falsification of public records. This is, on its face, a major case. The DA in Wapaka is going to want to charge it. Buford, I want it charged. He walked across the slope. He spent 40 minutes in the Yarwood Chesterfield kitchen. He came back to my driveway at 7:45 looking the way Buford Petrasic looks when somebody in his county has handed him a Sunday afternoon easy case in his Monday afternoon mailbox. Toby, she admitted everything. She admitted ordering the cut. She admitted producing the survey to Wendell. She admitted recording the easement in 2010. She believes, on the record, that she had legal authority. She has now been advised that she did not. Her husband is not home. He will be served tomorrow morning. Buford, did she apologize? Toby, she did not. Did she offer to replant? Toby, she told me, and I quote, Sheriff, I have been waiting 14 years to see that lake from my dining room. I am not sorry about the trees. I sat down on the tailgate of my truck. Buford waited. Buford, I want you to tell her something for me, through official channels, tomorrow morning. What's that? Tell her she's about to learn the difference between an aesthetic easement and a 100-foot agricultural grain silo. Buford looked at me. The corner of his mouth lifted exactly 1/8 of an inch. Toby, the land your windbreak was on is zoned agricultural. The state right to farm statute protects agricultural structures from HOA interference. How vertical. 100 feet, Buford. Galvanized steel. Suck Up Manufacturing out of Sheffield, Iowa, makes them. I'm planning to order it on Wednesday. Buford Petrasic, who has been the sheriff of Wapaka County for 17 years, looked at me for about 6 full seconds. Then he said very quietly, "Toby, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know the day they pour the foundation. I'd like to come watch." "Buford, I'll save you a folding chair." He drove off. I called my attorney Tessa Brundage in Stevens Point. She listened to the summary for 10 minutes without interrupting. Then she said, "Toby, order the silo." The next morning, Britlin came over with a clipboard. She had 3 of her board members with her, a thin woman in a Navy windbreaker named Adela Pickford, a heavy-set retired insurance executive named Cornelius Trask, and a teenage HOA volunteer she had brought along to document. None of them looked like they had slept well. She came up the porch steps without being invited. Mr. Halverson. Mrs. Yarwood Chesterfield. I have come to clarify a misunderstanding that I believe has arisen between our communities. Greta was at the kitchen window. Wyatt was at my elbow. My father had walked over from his house at 7 a.m. and was sitting in the porch swing, very still, watching her with eyes that had not blinked in about 90 seconds. "What misunderstanding?" I said. "I understand the sheriff visited my home yesterday evening. I would like to make clear that the timber harvest yesterday morning was conducted under the legal authority of an aesthetic easement granted to Lakeshore Hills Estates HOA in 2010. I have a recorded copy of that easement here." She produced it, 2 pages on cream paper, recorded with the Wapaka County Register of Deeds in March of 2010, signed, on the bottom line, by what was alleged to be the signature of Henrik Halverson, my father. My father looked at it from the porch swing. He looked at me. He shook his head, one slow time, side to side. "Mrs. Yarwood Chesterfield, my father did not sign that document. That is his signature on the bottom line." "Mrs. Yarwood Chesterfield, my father is here. He is sitting 6 feet from you. Would you like to ask him directly?" She looked at my father. My father looked back at her. He did not speak. His eyes did not waver. She did not ask him. Instead, she said brightly, "Well, we can clarify the signature through handwriting experts if necessary. In the meantime, the recorded document on file with the county is, prima facie, legally valid. Your remedy, if you dispute it, is a civil action to quiet title. Such an action typically takes 18 to 24 months and costs in the range of $40,000 in legal fees. I am, of course, very sorry if there has been a misunderstanding." She smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had been advised, by a lawyer somewhere overnight, to claim the document was real and to dare us to disprove it. I sipped my coffee. "Mrs. Yarwood Chesterfield, please leave my porch." "Mr. Halverson, I have come in good faith." "Mrs. Yarwood Chesterfield, the sheriff will be back here within the hour with a state-licensed handwriting examiner from the Wisconsin Department of Justice. He will be carrying a search warrant for the original 2010 filing record at the Wapaka County Register of Deeds. He will also be carrying a state subpoena for the bank records of Cedar Hills Land Services LLC, which I understand to be a vendor of Lakeshore Hills Estates HOA. Please leave my porch." Her face went white. She did not know I knew about Cedar Hills Land Services LLC. Tessa Brundage had spent the previous evening on the phone with my attorney friend at the Wisconsin Bureau of Consumer Protection. By 6 a.m. that morning, Tessa had a printout of Cedar Hills Land Services LLC's basic registration. Sole member, Stuart Yarwood Chesterfield, registered 2011, listed as a vendor on every HOA financial statement going back 12 years. Britlin opened her mouth. She closed it. Her hand tightened on the folder until the knuckles went white. She tried for a moment to say something about how the HOA's vendor relationships were internal community business and could not be discussed without appropriate process. I let her finish. I did not respond. I simply watched her. There are moments, after 38 years of farming, when the most useful thing a man can do is wait for somebody to stop digging. She kept digging. She mentioned that her husband Stuart had personal relationships with the Wisconsin State Banking Department. She mentioned that her family had supported state senators who took agricultural fraud very seriously. She mentioned, finally, that I was making a very serious mistake. Then she ran out of sentences. She turned. She walked back to the Cadillac Escalade, with her 3 board members in tow. The teenage HOA volunteer, on the way down the steps, made eye contact with Wyatt. He gave a tiny nod and a single small grimace that meant something like, "I am very sorry, I am here." Wyatt nodded back. The Escalade backed out of our driveway and drove up the slope. My father got up from the porch swing. He walked over to me. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Son, build the silo." "Yes, Pop." The investigation moved faster than even Tessa had predicted. By Wednesday morning, the handwriting examiner from the Wisconsin Department of Justice had walked the 2010 recorded document through every standard forensic comparison against 4 authenticated samples of my father's signature. The match scores were not even close. The 2010 easement signature, the examiner concluded in a 5-page report, was a forgery of moderate quality, executed by someone who had practiced from a single sample. By Wednesday afternoon, Tessa had subpoenaed the original recording file from the Waupaca County Register of Deeds. The original was checked in at the register's window in March of 2010 by Stuart Yarwood Chesterfield personally. The intake clerk, a now retired woman named Hildegard Flug, who Tessa had located in 2 phone calls, remembered the filing because Stuart had insisted on filing it on a Friday afternoon, when the register herself was at lunch. By Wednesday evening, Tessa had pulled the registered business filings on Cedar Hills Land Services, LLC. The company had been incorporated by Stuart in February of 2011, 3 months after Britland was first elected HOA president, and had been paid, over the course of the next 13 years, a total of $378,000 by Lakeshore Hills Estates HOA. The line item on the HOA financials was Vegetation Management Services. There was no documentation that Cedar Hills Land Services LLC had ever performed any actual vegetation management. The company's bank records showed every dollar received had been transferred, within 4 business days, to a personal account jointly held by Stuart and Britland. Tessa called me Thursday morning. "Toby, we have 3 layers. The forgery is a state-level Class H felony under Wisconsin Statute 943.38. The Shell LLC fraud is mail fraud, federal jurisdiction, and the tree cutting itself, beyond the trespass, is timber theft under 26.05. The statute applies a treble damages multiplier on the appraised value of the cut timber. The state foresters appraised the 60 trees at $142,000. Trebled. Your civil recovery on the trees alone is $426,000. And the federal layer. There's more. Garrick Lundholm at USDANRCS called me. The windbreak was registered under your Conservation Stewardship Program enrollment. You've been receiving small annual payments on it since 2014. Cutting the windbreak constitutes federal program interference. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Madison has been notified. I sat with that for a minute. Tessa, what about the heritage tree statute? Yes, Toby. 3 of the white oaks were over 75 years old. Wisconsin's Heritage Tree Act protects them. That carries an additional state criminal penalty per tree. I looked out the kitchen window. The slope where the windbreak had stood was raw earth. The stumps were still there. The smell of fresh-cut oak was still there. Tessa, how long until I can pour the silo foundation? Agricultural structures are administratively permitted in Waupaca County. Your zoning is A1. You can have the permit in your hand by tomorrow afternoon. Tessa, order the silo. Already done, Toby. Sukup Manufacturing in Sheffield, Iowa. 100-foot galvanized series. Delivery in 28 days. I closed my eyes. I opened them. Greta was at the counter. She was peeling apples for a pie. She looked at me. She said, "Toby, 28 days. 28 days. The 28 days were the strangest of my farming career. On day 3, the building permit was issued. On day 5, the concrete contractor I had used since 2011, Augustus Reimer out of Iola, who had been pouring my milking parlor pads for 13 years, came out with a ground-penetrating radar unit and his survey crew to mark the foundation location. I had specifically requested the foundation be placed at the corner of my property, where the line met the lakeside easement. The center of the silo would sit 11 feet from the property line. This was the maximum eastward placement allowed by Wisconsin Agricultural Code. It was, by no coincidence, the exact location that would maximally obstruct the lake view from the 21 premium Lakeshore Hills lots, whose owners had paid extra for unobstructed lake amenity access in their original purchase agreements. Augustus measured. He drove stakes. He pulled bright pink survey ribbon between the stakes. From the back porch of the Yarwood Chesterfield house, the pink ribbon would have been clearly visible. On day 7, the foundation was poured. 6 concrete trucks, 45 cubic yards of high-strength reinforced concrete, a circle 38 feet in diameter, 4 feet thick at the perimeter, 6 feet thick at the center bearing pad. Sheriff Buford Petrosick came at noon with a folding chair and a thermos of coffee and watched it cure for 2 hours. Wendell Schaefer came at 1. He brought a plate of bratwurst from the Iola sausage shop. He did not say much. He sat with us. My father came down from the original farmhouse at 1:30. He walked the perimeter of the curing foundation slowly, one full circle, with his hand resting lightly on the wet concrete edge. He had been a journeyman concrete finisher for 2 summers, in 1962 and 1963, between his stints in the Navy and on the farm. He still knew the smell of properly mixed Portland. He bent down at one point and pressed his thumb into a spot where Augustus had overfinished. He nodded once at Augustus, who nodded back, and that was the entire conversation between them. Augustus has known my father for 19 years. He understood the nod meant approval. He told me later it was the first time my father had ever issued one. Britlin Yarwood Chesterfield did not come out of her house that day. She had been served, on day 6, with the state criminal complaint, 3 felony counts and 4 misdemeanor counts. Bond had been set at $25,000. Her husband, Stuart, had been served simultaneously with a federal mail fraud indictment. She stayed off. She did, however, watch the foundation pour from her dining room window. Greta saw her there twice. Tessa filed the civil suit for treble damages on day 9. By day 12, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Madison had announced a parallel federal investigation into Cedar Hills Land Services, LLC. The story made the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel on day 14. It made the Wisconsin State Farm Bureau newsletter on day 15. It made the National Cooperative Business Association weekly bulletin on day 16. By day 18, I was getting calls from farmers in 3 states who had been similarly bullied by Lakeshore HOAs that had drawn boundary lines through their windbreaks. I gave each of them Tessa's number. By day 20, the silo arrived. It arrived in 4 flatbed trucks from Sheffield, Iowa, escorted by a wide-load permit caravan. The galvanized panels were 6 feet wide and 24 feet tall, curved to the silo's circumference. 42 of them. The soak-up field crew, 6 men in matching Navy coveralls, arrived in a chase van with 3 crawler cranes. They began erecting the silo on a Monday morning at 6 a.m. I was on the back porch with a cup of coffee. Wyatt was beside me. My father had walked over from his house at 5:45 and was sitting in the porch swing. Greta was in the kitchen with bacon and eggs for everyone. The first ring of panels went up by 10, the second by noon. By the end of the first day, the silo was 40 feet tall. By the end of the second day, it was 80. On the morning of day 22, the top dome was lifted into place. The silo stood, finished, on the corner of my property line, galvanized steel, 100 feet tall, reflecting morning sun like an enormous prairie lighthouse. From the dining room of Britlin Yarwood Chesterfield's house, the silo blocked 100% of the lake view she had killed 60 trees to obtain. From the dining rooms of all 21 premium Lakeshore Hills lots, the silo blocked between 60 and 90% of the lake view, depending on angle. The galvanized steel caught the morning sun in a way I had not anticipated. At about 7:15 each morning, a slow rectangle of reflected light would track across the eastern face of the Yarwood Chesterfield house, and then, 20 minutes later, across the eastern faces of the next 5 houses up the slope. Wyatt named it the silo wave. My father, who came over every morning that first week to drink coffee on our porch and watch the silo wave move across the houses, named it something less polite. He used a phrase Lars had used in 1944 in a naval after-action report. I will not repeat it here. The suck-up field crew climbed down, packed up their cranes, and shook my hand. The lead foreman, a man named Brock Niedermeyer, said, "Mr. Halverson, I have been erecting silos for 19 years. This is the first one I have ever built that I think is going to make the evening news." I said, "Brock, I appreciate it." He grinned. He drove off. I stood on the back porch with my wife, my son, my father, and a cup of coffee. We did not say anything for about 10 minutes. Then Greta said, "Toby, the lake view looks lovely from here." Britlin's response, when she could no longer see the lake from her dining room, was the response I had been quietly expecting. She filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit, filed in Wapaka County Circuit Court on day 24, alleged that my grain silo was a spite structure built in willful interference with the aesthetic property values of Lakeshore Hills Estates. The complaint sought a court order compelling me to dismantle the silo and restore the Lakeview amenity. The complaint asked for damages of $1.8 million. The complaint was, Tessa told me on the phone, the kind of complaint a desperate person files when they have run out of other options. "Toby, this complaint is going to be dismissed at the first hearing. Wisconsin's spite fence statutes do not apply to bona fide agricultural structures permitted under right to farm protections. The silo is a working structure. You have grain storage contracts for the 2025 corn harvest already on file. The complaint is, on its face, frivolous." "How long until dismissal?" 45 days. The judge is Madison Wallenstein. She has not granted a spite fence injunction against an agricultural structure in her 22-year career. She is also a third-generation Wisconsin dairy farmer's daughter. Tessa, recommend we counterfile. Already drafted. Counterclaim for tortious interference with a federally registered conservation program, plus the timber theft treble damages, plus the civil portion of the forgery damages. I'll file Monday. She filed Monday. The HOA Facebook group, which Wyatt had been quietly monitoring through a friend, exploded on Tuesday morning. Britlin posted a long, careful, plausible-sounding statement of concerned community rhetoric. She called my silo an industrial monstrosity erected in retaliation against neighborhood beautification. She called me, by name, an unhinged farmer with a personal vendetta. She called the criminal charges against her husband a politically motivated overreach. The post was shared 712 times within 2 days. It was deleted on the morning of day 28, when Britlin's defense attorney advised her that publicly maligning a witness against her in a pending criminal trial was, possibly, a fresh federal witness intimidation charge. The deletion did not remove the screenshots. Meanwhile, on day 26, Britlin made a decision that would, in retrospect, be the single stupidest decision of her stupid little campaign. She came onto my property. She came at dusk, alone, in the white Cadillac Escalade. She pulled up to the base of the silo. She got out. She was carrying a can of red spray paint. I had, on the recommendation of Tessa, installed 11 high-resolution security cameras around the silo foundation, the property line, and the windbreak stump zone the day after the silo was erected. My phone chimed at 6:43 p.m., while I was at the kitchen table eating Greta's pot roast. I opened the alert. There was Britlin Yarwood Chesterfield, in 4K resolution, in coral linen, at the base of my silo, shaking a can of red spray paint. She wrote 2 words on the curved galvanized panel at chest height. The first word was ugly. The second word was spite. The paint was the wrong kind of paint to write on galvanized steel. It beaded, it ran. The letters dripped down the panel like blood from a cartoon villain. She stood back. She admired her work. She took a photograph of it with her phone. She got in the Escalade. She drove away. The whole thing took 91 seconds. I finished my pot roast. I called Sheriff Buford Petrasic. "Toby, tell me you have it on video." 11 angles. "Toby, I will see you in 20 minutes. He saw me in 18. He took my statement. He took copies of the footage. He drove to Britlin Yarwood Chesterfield's home and arrested her, on her own front porch, on a fresh state charge of felony criminal mischief on a structure under permit, plus a violation of her existing bond conditions. She spent the night in the Wapaka County Jail. The silo, the next morning, had a small spray-painted scar at chest height that read, "Ugly Spite," in dripping red letters. I left it there. The spray paint did not survive on the silo. I have a friend in Stevens Point who does specialized chemical paint removal. He came out the following Monday with a portable hot water cleaner and a quart of degreaser. The paint came off in 24 minutes. I had photographed it from 9 angles before he started. Tessa archived every photograph. The week that followed was the kind of week a small Wisconsin county does not see very often. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel ran a feature on the case on Tuesday under the headline, "Wisconsin Farmer Builds 100-Foot Silo in Response to HOA Tree-Cutting Alleged Fraud." The Associated Press picked it up Wednesday. By Thursday morning, the story had been carried by farm radio stations in Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, North Dakota, and Pennsylvania. I did not give interviews. I gave one statement, drafted by Tessa through her office. It said, "The Halverson family supports the lawful agricultural use of all family land. The 100-foot grain silo at the corner of our property is a working structure that will serve our 2025 corn harvest and beyond. We trust the criminal justice system to address the unauthorized tree cutting and any related fraud. We have nothing further to say at this time." Meanwhile, the federal case against Stuart Yarwood Chesterfield moved very quickly. Stuart was arraigned in U.S. District Court for the Western District of Wisconsin on day 42. The indictment included 19 counts. Bond was set at $120,000. Stuart was suspended from his position as district director within 72 hours. The state case against Britland moved a few days behind. She was bound over for trial on all 6 counts on day 48. The court did not grant her motion to dismiss the felony criminal mischief count related to the silo spray painting. The HOA itself, 14 years into its arrangement with the Yarwood Chesterfield family, began the slow, uncomfortable process of figuring out what it was without them. 2 longtime board members resigned, 3 new candidates announced. A motion to call an emergency election was filed by a retired chemistry teacher from the development named Imogene Pellinger. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Mr. Halverson, this is Imogene Pellinger from Lakeshore Hills. I would like, on behalf of 14 households in this development who are appalled by what has been done in our name, to apologize to your family. I would also like to know what we can do to begin to make this right." I sat with that for a minute. "Mrs. Pellinger, may I ask you a question? Why did it take until now?" There was a pause on the line. "Mr. Halverson, because I was afraid of her. We all were. She has run this development like a feudal estate for 11 years. I have been waiting for somebody to do something." "Mrs. Pellinger, would you and any of the 14 households like to come over to my house on Saturday afternoon? Bring a notepad." She came. She brought 11 of the 14. They came on foot, up the slope, past the silo, across the property line, to my front porch. They sat in folding chairs Greta and Wyatt had set up on the lawn. My father came over from his house. Tessa came up from Stevens Point. Wendell Schaefer came. Sheriff Petrasic came. We talked for 3 hours. By the end of the afternoon, the 11 households had agreed to support a complete restructuring of the Lakeshore Hills Estates HOA, including new bylaws barring any boundary maintenance or aesthetic interference with adjacent agricultural land, full annual financial disclosure to all members, and a formal community letter of apology to the Halverson family. The bylaws were drafted by Tessa the following week. The apology letter was signed by 63 of 78 households within 20 days. The trial happened in March. By the time it started, the case had become the most watched agricultural law trial in Wisconsin in 15 years. The Wisconsin State Bar Journal had run a feature article on the use of right-to-farm protections as an offensive litigation tool. The University of Wisconsin Law School had assigned the case as a case study in 2 property law seminars. I testified on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of trial. I wore a clean barn coat over a button-down shirt and a pair of Carhartt jeans Greta had ironed the night before. My father came. Greta came. Wyatt came. Marigold drove up from Madison. Henrik sat in the 2nd row of the gallery, hands folded in his lap, watching the witness stand the way an old farmer watches a soybean field at dawn. The prosecutor was a woman named Bridget Halloran Statmuller, an assistant district attorney in her mid-40s, who had specialized in agricultural fraud for 9 years. She walked me through the windbreak. She walked me through Lars's 1947 planting. She walked me through the morning of the cut. She walked me through the conversation with Wendell Schaefer in the gravel. She walked me through my father's 78-year history with the windbreak. She walked me through Rune's tree. When I described Rune sitting under the third white oak from the North End, reading Larry McMurtry paperbacks in the summer of 1985, the summer before he died, I did not get all the way through the sentence. I had to stop. The courtroom was silent. The judge waited. Greta, in the gallery, had her hand on Henrik's. I finished. The defense attorney, a man named Ferdinand Updike out of Milwaukee, attempted to suggest on cross-examination that the windbreak had been neglected and the trees were in declining health. I said, "Mr. Updike, I have spent 11 years walking that windbreak every March to inspect for emerald ash borer, two-line chestnut borer, oak wilt, and bacterial leaf scorch. I have annual inspection records on file with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Every tree your client's crew cut was rated healthy or healthy with monitoring as of my most recent inspection in April." He did not ask me a follow-up question. He did, 20 minutes later, attempt a similar line about whether the silo was really a working structure or a performative gesture. I said, "Mr. Updike, the 2024 corn harvest on this farm came in at 12,800 bushels. Our existing storage capacity is 9,000 bushels. Without the silo, we would be selling at harvest time prices, which are historically the lowest of the year. With the silo, we can hold inventory until April or May, when prices typically average 87 cents per bushel higher. The silo will pay for itself in roughly 6 harvest cycles. I would be delighted to walk you through the math." The jury laughed. The judge did not stop them. Mr. Updike sat down. The state's closing argument was 41 minutes long. The defense's closing was 27. The jury was sent to deliberate at 3:15 on a Wednesday afternoon. They came back the next morning at 10:07. The verdict was read by the jury foreman, a retired Wausau paper mill foreman in a brown corduroy jacket whose name I did not catch. Brittlin Yarwood Chesterfield was convicted on all 6 counts: the forgery, the conspiracy, the criminal trespass, the 2 counts of timber theft, the criminal mischief on the silo. She did not react when the first count was read. She did not react when the second was read. On the 3rd count, her shoulders began to shake. By the 6th, she was weeping openly into a handkerchief her attorney had handed her. The court bailiff escorted her out the side door of the courtroom for sentencing. She would serve 1 year at the Robert E. Ellsworth Correctional Center in Union Grove, plus 3 years of supervised probation, plus restitution. Stuart Yarwood Chesterfield's federal trial concluded 6 weeks later. He pled to 12 of 19 counts. He served 38 months at FCI Pekin in Illinois. Cedar Hills Land Services, LLC, was dissolved by court order. The Lakeshore Hills Estates, HOA, refunded $146,000 in fraudulent vegetation management fees back to its 63 remaining members. I took none of the settlement money personally. The amount the courts awarded the Halverson family was directed, by my request and by family vote, into a new fund. We called it the Rune Halverson Memorial Windbreak Initiative. The initiative funds the planting of replacement windbreaks on Wisconsin farms where the original windbreaks have been damaged, removed, or destroyed by encroachment, weather, or development. We pay for the saplings, the soil amendments, the labor, and the first 3 years of establishment care: black cherry, white oak, eastern hemlock, white pine. We work through the University of Wisconsin Extension Office. Greta runs it. Wyatt does most of the field work. In the first 20 months, the initiative replanted 41 windbreaks across 9 Wisconsin counties. The first replanting was, by family vote, on our own farm. It happened on a Saturday morning in April, 15 months after the cut. Henrik came out at 6:30 to mark the row. He used the same hand maul Lars had used in 1947, which had been hanging in the barn for 77 years. We planted 60 new seedlings, 8 feet apart, in the exact spacing Lars had used. Marigold drove up from Madison. Wyatt brought Annika. the woman he had been dating for 14 months, who arrived in a barn coat and showed up at 5:45 with 2 carafes of coffee. Tessa Brundage drove up from Stevens Point and brought her 2 teenage daughters. Wendell Schaefer came at 6. Sheriff Petrasic came at 6:30 and brought a thermos and 4 hot egg sandwiches from the Iola sausage shop. By 8 a.m., there were 47 people on the property line, half of them strangers to me, all of them with shovels. By 9, the seedlings were in the ground. By 10, the row was tied off with bright pink survey ribbon. By 11, Greta had set out 3 crock pots of soup on the front porch, and the 60 seedlings had been formally photographed by a reporter from the Wisconsin State Farmer. Marigold planted the 3rd tree from the north end. We called that one Rune's tree. The seedlings are now 4 years old. They are 12 feet tall. They are doing well. The 3rd one from the north end is the tallest. I think Rune would approve. Henrik passed in October of last year. He was peaceful at the end. The last thing he said to me, on a Wednesday afternoon at the original farmhouse, was, "Son, the trees coming back?" "Yes, Pa, they're coming back." "Good." He closed his eyes. We buried him on the south end of the alfalfa field, next to Rune, in the small family plot Lars set aside in 1947, the same year he planted the windbreak. There is a small granite stone with his name and the years, and a line my mother used to say about him every night at supper. The line is, "He always knew what was right, and he did it without making a fuss." Wyatt got engaged in June. Her name is Annika Stromer. She is 26, a soil scientist out of UW Stevens Point, and she is the calmest woman I have ever watched my son try to impress. They are getting married next summer on the south lawn. The silo is still on the property line. It is full of corn from last year's harvest. We sold the 2024 crop in May for 91 cents per bushel over the harvest price. The silo paid for 38% of itself in the first year. Wyatt has been talking about painting a large stenciled Halverson Farms, Eastern 1947, onto the south face next spring. I have not decided whether to let him. I am, as of this writing, leaning toward letting him. The Lakeshore Hills Estates HOA has a new president. Her name is Imogene Pellinger. She has not issued a frivolous complaint in 2 years. The view from the dining rooms of the 21 premium lots still includes my grain silo. Britland served her year at Ellsworth. She and Stewart moved to Naples, Florida. Their old house at Lakeshore Hills is now owned by a young couple from Madison, both pediatricians, who introduced themselves to me at the mailbox on their first day. They brought a coffee cake. They told me they liked the silo. If you have made it this far, do me one small favor. If you have ever had an HOA, a developer, or a small-town queen try to cut down something your family planted, drop a note in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from. Tell us what they cut. Tell us what you wish you had built instead. And if you want to see next week's case, the HOA treasurer who tried to seize a Korean War veteran's pickup and ended up in federal court, make sure you are subscribed. We post a new story every week. I'll see you on the next one.
What really happened here is simpler than the indictment makes it look. Toby Harbinson didn't win because he was angry. He won because he knew the difference between an HOA bylaw and a state right to farm statute. For 14 years, an HOA ran a tree management racket against a working Wisconsin farm, propping up a forged easement with a shell LLC her husband used to siphon $400,000 from his neighbors. None of it would have surfaced if Britland had left Lars Harvinson's 1947 windbreak alone. She did not. The day she ordered the cut, she handed a fourth-generation farmer the legal authority to build a 100-foot grain silo into her dining room window. The lesson here is worth saying out loud. Right to farm protection in your state probably go further than you realize. If you own working agricultural land, study them. If someone tries to push your line, you can push back. If you want to see next week's case, the HOA treasurer who tried to seize a Korean War veteran's pickup and ended up in a federal court, make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.